So, you think the Olympics are about sportsmanship and international unity? That's cute. The original games, held at Olympia, were technically a religious festival to honor Zeus. This meant lots of rituals, animal sacrifices, and priests looking very serious. But underneath all that pious grandeur was the same old human story: politics, rivalry, and a burning desire to prove your city-state was better than your neighbors. To facilitate this, they declared a sacred truce, the Ekicheria, a brilliant idea where everyone agreed to stop killing each other just long enough to travel to Olympia. Naturally, this truce was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. It was violated constantly, because honoring the gods is important, but conquering that coastal town your cousin rules is, also important. One of the first things you'd notice at the ancient games is the dress code, or rather, the lack of one. The athletes completely naked. The story goes that a runner named Orsippus lost his loincloth mid-race and won, so everyone just decided clothing was for losers. A more likely reason is that it was a display of peak physical perfection, a tribute to the gods. It also meant there was nowhere to hide illegal equipment, which is a surprisingly practical consideration. This led to the creation of the gymnasium, which literally translates to school for naked exercise. It was all very noble and artistic, except for the practical realities of dust, sunburn on absolutely everything, and the fact that oil-slicked naked wrestling is probably the slipperiest thing imaginable. The track and field events were one thing, but the real crowd pleasers were the combat sports, and the king of them all was the pancreation. Think of it as ancient mixed martial arts, but designed by people who thought safety was a boring suggestion. The only rules were no biting and no eye gouging. That's it. Everything else, strangling, joint locking, kicking a downed opponent, was perfectly fine. They fought until one person submitted or, and this happened, died. The champion Aurelian of Figalia famously won his third title in 564 BCE by breaking his opponent's ankle as he himself was being choked to death. His opponent submitted from the pain, but Aurelian was already dead. They crowned his corpse the winner. Peak performance, apparently. Then there was the pentathlon, a sort of ancient decathlon for people with shorter attention spans. It included running, wrestling, javelin, and discus, which all seem normal enough. And then there was the long jump. Instead of a running start, athletes likely started from a standing position, holding stone or lead weights called halteres. They would swing these weights forward as they jumped, supposedly to increase their distance. Modern analysis suggests this technique would, at best, be incredibly awkward and, at worst, throw you completely off balance. It's a bit like trying to improve your 100-meter dash time by strapping anvils to your hands. It demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of physics that is both endearing and, frankly, a little worrying for a civilization that invented geometry. If you really wanted to show off, you didn't compete yourself. That's for peasants. You entered the chariot race. This was the most prestigious event, the ancient equivalent of Formula One, but with more horse-related chaos. The trick was, the owner of the chariot and horses was declared the winner, not the poor guy actually risking his life driving it. This meant a rich person could win an Olympic title from the comfort of the stands. The Athenian general Alcibiades once entered 7 chariots in a single race, because subtlety was for other people. The race itself was carnage. Taking place in a wide open field called a hippodrome, there were no lane dividers. Crashes at the turning posts were frequent, spectacular, and almost always fatal for the drivers. It was less a sport and more a demolition derby with livestock. The myth of the pure, noble ancient athlete is just that. Cheating was rampant. Athletes bribed judges, they bribed each other, and they probably tried to bribe Zeus himself. But the Greeks had an ingenious solution for this: public shaming. If you were caught cheating, you had to pay a massive fine. That money was then used to build bronze statues of Zeus, called Zanes. These weren't just any statues. They were erected right on the pathway all athletes had to walk to enter the stadium. And on the base of each statue, they inscribed the name of the cheater, what they did, and a little message about how piety is better than winning dishonestly. It was a permanent, very expensive, divinely sanctioned walk of shame for everyone to see for centuries. Officially, the only prize for winning an Olympic event was a crown made from the branch of a sacred olive tree. Very humble, very pure. In reality, that olive wreath was a ticket to a lifetime of luxury. When a champion returned to his home city, he was treated like a rock star. Cities would tear down a section of their defensive walls for him to enter through, symbolizing that a city with such an athlete didn't need walls. They received huge cash rewards, tax exemptions, front row seats at the theater, and often free meals for the rest of their lives. So while the organizers promoted this idea of amateurism, the entire system was a gigantic state-sponsored professional circuit. The olive branch was just a pretty packaging on a very large pile of money. So, who was missing from this giant, naked, violent party? Pretty much half the population. Married women were forbidden from even watching the games. The penalty for sneaking in was to be thrown off a nearby mountain, which seems a bit extreme for catching a glimpse of the javelin event. Unmarried women could watch, for reasons that historians still debate with a slight sense of discomfort. There was one loophole for women to get Olympic glory: the chariot race. Since the owner won, a woman could own and enter a team. A Spartan princess named Kyniska did exactly that, becoming the first female Olympic victor in 396 BCE without ever setting foot in Olympia. She was a trailblazer, proving that with enough money and a clever understanding of the rules, you could break barriers from a very safe distance. And if you weren't competing, just attending the games was its own endurance event. There was no grand stadium, just a packed earth track and a sloping hill where up to 45,000 spectators would sit. In the scorching heat of a Greek August, with no shade, for 5 days. The sanitation was, to put it mildly, non-existent. The two nearby rivers served as both the water supply and the sewer system. The historian Pausanias, who visited centuries later, was still complaining about the sheer chaos and discomfort. People suffered from sunstroke, dehydration, and diseases that spread like wildfire in the crowded, filthy conditions. It was less a sporting event and more a massive public health crisis with a wrestling match in the middle. You really had to love sports to put up with that. So how did this glorious, insane tradition end? Roman Emperor Theodosius I, a devout Christian, banned them in 393 AD for being a pagan festival. Olympia slowly fell into ruin, buried by earthquakes and floods, forgotten for over 1,000 years. When we revived the games in 1896, we kept the name and some of the events, but we conveniently left out the nakedness, the death matches, and the ritualistic crowning of corpses. We sanitized it. Yet we held on to the fierce nationalism, the political maneuvering, and the massive commercial enterprise lurking just beneath the surface. So maybe the modern Olympics aren't so different after all. They're just the ancient games with better plumbing and slightly fewer fatalities. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!